In the high-stakes world of Miami's financial underground, invisibility was Hazel Wynn's greatest professional asset and her most persistent personal wound. She had spent 7 years at Castellan Group, making herself useful in all the ways that didn't require anyone to actually see her. She restructured accounts that 3 CPAs before her couldn't untangle. She caught a money laundering scheme buried in 17 layers of shell companies before the feds got within sniffing distance. She kept the kind of secrets that in her industry got people relocated to the bottom of Biscayne Bay. And still, when the senior partners walked past her desk on the way to their glass-walled conference room, their eyes moved through her like she was furniture. Not a filing cabinet, maybe. Something load-bearing and completely unremarkable. Hazel was 31 years old, 5'4", and built the way her grandmother used to describe with a proud click of her tongue, substantial. She had a face that was pretty in a quiet, unadvertised way, dark brown eyes that catalogued everything, and the kind of mind that most people in her orbit were too proud to acknowledge, because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging what it reflected about their own. She wore blazers that fit, because she'd stopped apologizing for needing them tailored differently. She wore her natural hair pinned back during work hours, because it was efficient, not because anyone told her to. She had learned a long time ago that the best armor in a room full of people who underestimated you was to simply let them keep doing it. That was the strategy. That was until Rourke Callahan walked into Castellan Group on a Tuesday in October and turned every carefully maintained calculation she had about her own life completely upside down. Rourke Callahan was not a client. He was not a partner, not a colleague, not a regulatory auditor, not a man who had any legitimate reason to be standing in front of the Castellan Group receptionist on a Tuesday morning asking to speak with the forensic accounting team. But he was there, and the way the senior partners responded to his arrival, the way they straightened their spines and suddenly found urgent reasons to emerge from their offices, told Hazel everything she needed to know about who he actually was. She watched from her desk as he moved through the lobby, tall, dark suit, no tie, a kind of controlled ease in the way he carried himself that didn't belong to any client she'd ever processed. He had the particular stillness of a man who had never once in his adult life been required to make himself smaller for a room. He was, objectively, the most dangerous-looking person she had ever seen in a professional setting. And then his eyes found hers across the lobby, not sweeping past, not looking through, and he held the contact for exactly 2 seconds before Warren Daly, the managing partner, materialized at his elbow and ushered him away. Hazel looked back at her screen. She told herself the warmth at the back of her neck was from the lobby's poor ventilation. She told herself that for about 3 more days, right up until the moment Warren Daly called her into his office and told her she'd been assigned to a new client engagement, personal request, full discretion required, and when she asked the client's name, he wrote it on a piece of paper rather than saying it out loud. Callahan Group. The first meeting was in a building in Brickell that had no signage, no lobby art, and security that reminded Hazel of the kind of airports you only passed through on accident. She brought her laptop, her external hard drive, 2 legal pads, and the particular brand of professional blank she had spent years perfecting, the expression that said, "I am here to do a job, and nothing about this situation will rattle me." She was slightly rattled. Rourke Callahan was already in the conference room when she arrived. He was standing at the window, looking out at the bay, and he didn't turn around immediately when she came in. She took that moment to catalogue the room, 2 other men near the door, a stack of financial documents on the table that she could already tell from a distance had been prepared by someone who knew just enough to be dangerous, and a laptop that was running what looked like 3 separate encrypted windows. "Miss Wynn," he said without turning around. Her name in his mouth landed differently than she expected. Deliberate, like he'd read it multiple times and decided how he wanted it to sound. "Mr. Callahan," she said, setting her laptop bag on the table. Should we talk about the scope of the engagement, or do you want to start with the files? He turned then, in the context of the conference room without the lobby's filtered light, he was sharper. Cleaner somehow, more present. He had a jaw that looked like it had been drawn by someone who took the assignment seriously, and dark eyes that moved over her face with the same cataloguing precision she'd used on the room. "You were recommended," he said, "by someone whose judgment I don't question. I appreciate that." The files. The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile. "Straight to work. That's what I'm here for." He sat down across from her, and for the next 4 hours, Hazel Wynn did what she did better than anyone she had ever met. She looked at numbers, and she found the truth buried inside them. The truth in this case was alarming. There was a second set of books. Not Rourke's. The discrepancy moved in the wrong direction for that, and she'd worked enough of these to know the difference between a man hiding money and a man being quietly robbed. Someone inside the Callahan financial structure had been siphoning, carefully, slowly, in amounts small enough to pass casual review. Whoever it was had been doing it for at least 18 months. And they were very good. Not good enough. Hazel sat back from the laptop and looked at Rourke across the table. "You have a problem," she said. "I know I have a problem. That's why you're here." "No," she said, and she turned the screen toward him. "I mean, you have a very specific problem with a very specific name attached to it, and I can prove it in about 3 more hours if you give me access to the secondary accounts." The stillness that came over him then was different from the controlled ease she'd observed in the lobby. This was something older, something that lived underneath the professional surface. His eyes moved from the screen to her face, and she had the strange, involuntary thought that she was looking at a man who was genuinely surprised, not by the information, but by her. "Secondary accounts," he said slowly. "The ones that don't appear in the files you gave me, but do appear in the transaction metadata if you know what to look for." She held his gaze. "I know what to look for." The silence stretched for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "Get me a name." She got him a name. It took 2.5 hours, 3 cups of coffee that someone brought without her asking, and the kind of sustained concentration that left her with a low-grade headache behind her left eye. When she turned the final compiled report toward him at 11:43 that night, he read it in silence for 4 minutes. Then he looked up. "Gordon Fitch," he said, and something in his voice made the 2 men near the door exchange a glance. "Gordon Fitch," Hazel confirmed. 18 months, 47 separate transactions, total exposure just under 2.3 million. I can walk you through the methodology if... How long have you been doing this? The question caught her sideways. Forensic accounting, being the smartest person in any room you walk into. She felt the warmth at the back of her neck again. She kept her face professional. "I'd need more data points to confirm that claim." He looked at her for a long moment. Not the cataloging assessment from earlier, something different, something that felt less like evaluation and more like recognition. "I need you on retainer," he said, "exclusive. The work you did tonight isn't something I can have going to other clients. That's not how my firm works. I know. I'll handle your firm." She should have pushed back. She should have cited the professional protocols, the conflict of interest provisions, the 15 specific reasons why a forensic accountant establishing an exclusive relationship with a client whose business interests existed in a distinctly grey legal territory was a career-ending decision. She opened her mouth to say exactly that. What are the terms? The terms instead was. The work was real, and Hazel spent the next 3 months trying very hard to keep the engagement exactly as professional as it had started. The effort was complicated by several factors, not least of which was the fact that Rourke Callahan appeared to have decided, somewhere around the end of the 2nd month, that maintaining professional distance was not actually a priority. It started with small things. He remembered. How she took her coffee. He asked questions about her work that went beyond what the engagement required. Not interrogation, genuine curiosity, the kind that meant he had been paying attention. when she caught an issue in a secondary filing that she flagged purely out of professional habit, and that saved him what she later calculated was close to $400,000, he looked at her across the conference table and said, "What do you want?" with a directness that had nothing to do with compensation. "What do I want?" she repeated, "as a thank you. Not a bonus. Something you actually want." She had stared at him. "I want the Delgado account files by Thursday so I can close the quarter review." He had laughed. It was the first time she'd heard it, and the sound was different from what she'd have predicted, unguarded, real. It changed his face in a way that she filed carefully away in a part of her mind she was trying not to acknowledge. "Thursday," he said. "You'll have them Wednesday." She did. The thing that made it complicated, the real thing underneath the coffee order and the Delgado files and the laughing, was that Rourke Callahan never made her feel like the room. He looked at her when she spoke. Not past, not through. He challenged her reasoning when he disagreed and acknowledged when she was right, without the particular performance of surprise that she had grown so accustomed to that she barely registered it from other men. He never once mentioned her appearance in a way that felt like assessment. She was, she understood, somewhere around week 10, in serious trouble. The trouble compounded on a Thursday in January, when she arrived at the Brickell building for a routine review and found the lobby emptied of its usual peripheral staff. The two men who were normally near the door were nowhere. The receptionist's desk was vacant. Hazel stood in the empty lobby for approximately 4 seconds before her body registered what her brain was still catching up to. The silence was wrong. Acute, specific wrong, the kind that preceded something rather than following it. She had turned to leave when the stairwell door at the far end of the lobby opened, and Rourke came through it at a pace that was distinctly not his usual controlled stride. "Come with me," he said. "Now." "What's now, Hazel?" The use of her first name stopped her for a half-second. He'd always said Miss Wynn in professional contexts, precise and consistent. And then her professional instincts overrode the distraction, and she followed him. He took her up 2 flights through a door that required a biometric scan and into a room she'd never seen, windowless, server-lined walls, emergency lighting in a low amber glow. The door locked behind them with a sound that she felt in her sternum. "Someone made a move tonight," he said. He was standing near the far wall with his phone in his hand, scanning something. "Internal, we have a secondary leak." Fitch had a partner. He looked up. "You suspected. The transfers I traced last time, the timing intervals were too consistent for one person managing them alone. I mentioned it in the report appendix." She was already thinking through the data she'd reviewed in the last 3 months. "Give me your laptop." "Hazel!" "The laptop, Rourke." Something shifted in his expression when she used his name, but he handed her the laptop. What followed was 2.5 hours in a room the size of a large walk-in closet, with amber emergency lighting and the hum of servers and the particular electric tension of proximity to a person she had been trying very hard not to think about in non-professional terms. She worked. He stayed close, not hovering but present, and twice when she needed a secondary access credential, he provided it before she finished asking. At one point, leaning over to point at something on the screen, his shoulder pressed against hers, and neither of them moved away. She found the second name at 12:40 in the morning. She had found the mechanism, the timeline, and the external account, where the funds had been moving. She realized when she sat back from the laptop, potentially just saved him from a federal exposure that could have ended everything he had built. The room was very quiet. "Nadia," he said, reading the name on screen. His voice had gone flat in a way she recognized now, that deep current stillness. "Nadia Brecht," Hazel confirmed. She was running interference on the external account while Fitch handled the internal transfers. "Without both pieces, I wouldn't have seen it. Nobody would have. You were better." He said it simply, not with the flavor of surprise that people generally served compliments to her with. Just as fact, delivered plainly the way he might report a number. She turned to look at him and found that he was already looking at her. In the amber light of the server room, with the city locked outside and the distance between them reduced to the length of a conference table. Except there was no conference table, there was almost no space at all. She understood that the professional container she had been carefully maintaining for 3 months was not going to hold for the rest of this night. "This is not a good idea," she said. "I know. I work for you. Technically, I'm aware. And you should also know," she said, "that I am not a woman who does things halfway. If this is something you're considering, I need you to understand that about me up front, because I have spent a long time not apologizing for who I am, and I'm not going to start." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I don't want you to apologize for anything." "Rourke, I want you to stay," he said. "Not because of the work, because I have been in this building with you for 3 months, and you are the only person in any room I walk into who makes me feel like I am operating at actual capacity." He paused. "That is not a feeling I have had before." Hazel looked at him for a long time. "You have terrible timing," she said finally. "I know that too." The aftermath of that night was complicated, as she had known it would be. Not between them. That part, counterintuitively, was the least complicated thing. What followed was the external complexity, the fallout from Nadia Brecht's exposure, the reorganization of Rourke's internal team, the quiet professional earthquake of Hazel extracting herself from Castellian Group under terms she negotiated with the kind of cold precision that left Warren Daly temporarily speechless. What she had not anticipated was the fear, not of Rourke. She'd spent enough time in his orbit to understand the difference between a man who exercised control and a man who needed to dominate. Not of the grey edges of his business world, which she had been navigating professionally for long enough that her own moral accounting on the matter was settled. The fear was older than that, and more personal. She was not a woman who had been told repeatedly in large and small ways that she was lovable. She was capable, certainly, useful, without question. But the particular kind of visibility that Rourke offered her, the way he looked at her across a room like she was the fixed point everything else, organized around, sat uncomfortably against years of accumulated evidence that people like her did not get to be the person someone looked for first. She told him this, not prettily, not in a way that invited consolation, but directly, because that was how she did everything. They were in his apartment, his real one, not the Brickell building, a space that looked like him. Clean lines, serious art, a kitchen that suggested someone actually cooked. And she had been standing at the window with her second glass of wine when she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it." He set down his glass. "I'm listening." She told him about the accumulated weight of being the smart one who nobody quite saw, about the particular exhaustion of being an asset who was never quite the main character of anyone else's story, about the deep programmed suspicion that this, whatever this was between them, would eventually run up against the version of her that existed in the physical world and find itself reconsidering. She said it all plainly, without asking for reassurance, because she was not looking for reassurance. She was looking for him to understand what he was actually agreeing to. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Come here," he said. "Rourke, Hazel, come here." She came. He didn't touch her immediately. He looked at her, the same direct cataloguing gaze she'd clocked in the lobby on that first Tuesday, except now she knew what it actually meant. "I heard you," he said, "all of it. I want you to hear me." He paused. "I have been in rooms with brilliant people my entire adult life. I have trusted 3 of them completely. One of those 3 people is in this room right now, and she is standing here telling me she's not sure if she's worth looking for." His voice was even, not performative, not pitched to comfort. "I look for you first," he said. "In every room. I have for 3 months. I'll keep doing it for as long as you'll let me." Hazel did not dissolve into tears. That was not who she was. But she stood very still for a moment and let the words settle somewhere inside her that had been braced against them for a long time. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Don't push it," she said. He almost smiled. She was learning to love almost. 3 weeks later, standing in the main conference room of the reorganized Callahan Group building, with 8 people around the table who represented various operational layers of an enterprise, she now understood better than most of the people who worked within it. Rourke said something she had not been prepared for. He said, "This is Hazel Wynn. She is my chief financial strategist. She has full access to every account across every entity, and any financial decision that doesn't go through her first doesn't happen. That's not a preference, that's policy." The room was quiet. Hazel did not look away from the table. She kept her face professional, but she felt something in her chest shift, a bracing that had been there so long she'd stopped noticing the weight of it. Finally, slowly relax. One of the men near the end of the table, who she had clocked as a senior operations manager, said, "The forensic accountant, the architect of how this organization survives the next decade," Rourke said. Flat. Final. "Are there questions?" There were no questions. After, in the hallway, she looked at him. "Chief Financial Strategist," she said. "Is that a problem?" "You could have told me that was the plan." "I did tell you. When 3 months ago, in a server room at midnight, I told you I wanted you to stay." She looked at him for a long moment. "You have a very liberal definition of communication," she said. "And you," he said, "have been the most important decision I have made in the last 5 years. I'm just making sure everyone in a professional radius understands that." She thought about her grandmother, the proud click of her tongue. She thought about 7 years of moving through rooms where she was the filing cabinet, the load-bearing, unremarkable thing. She thought about Rourke Callahan turning around at a window over Biscayne Bay on a Tuesday morning and saying her name like he'd decided how he wanted it to sound. "Okay," she said, the same word as 3 weeks ago, different weight entirely. He looked at her the way he always looked at her. First, fixed, certain. "Okay," he said back.